to a new software application. The software application that we're going to be using is Adobe InDesign. If yours is not down in your toolbar, you can go to the Go menu, or you can do Command Spacebar and type InDesign into your search menu, and then you can open up InDesign. It may take just a minute for it to open up the first time. It's kind of a big program, so it takes a minute to build your preferences. Now, we've been using two different applications up until this point. We've been using Adobe Illustrator, which creates vector objects, and those objects are based on points and lines and can be scaled. And we've been using Photoshop, which deals with raster elements, and so those are those pixels on the screen. So Illustrator creates illustrations. You might use it for a logo design or an illustration of an object. You may use it for single page flyers, product packaging, that type of thing. And then Photoshop is just for photo manipulation or photo illustration and editing those photos. Now, when you start to add quite a bit of text and start to build multiple page documents, that's when you need to be using InDesign. Now, the one thing that happens is a lot of designers are introduced to Illustrator first or Photoshop first, and they become comfortable with how those tools work. And so then what they do is they start to build everything in those in those applications, which is not the correct way to do it. You should, if you find yourself building more than one artboard or more than one page in Illustrator, you should stop and you should add it to InDesign instead. InDesign is meant for adding lots of text and dealing with text. Formatting, there's a lot more specific controls for building these multiple page documents, and it deals with those multiple page documents. Now I'm going to go through a basic introduction to InDesign here and show you some of the things that are a little bit different with InDesign. So we'll start with this introduction, and then we'll put together a couple of videos to help you with some of the other assignments. But this whole part should look very familiar. We're going to create a new document. And if you look at your new document here, it actually gives you the option for a preview. And so you can see what your page is going to look like. So right now I've got a preset that's default. We've got the intent of print. And you can actually design documents for web or mobile. And the difference between the two, just like in Illustrator, are going to be the resolution of the raster elements. So if you choose print, the raster elements are going to be print resolution, 300 dpi. If you choose web, they're going to be 72 dpi, or mobile will be 72 dpi. And then the color space. CMYK for print, RGB for web and mobile, and then the units of measurement are going to be different. So if I choose web, you can see it goes to pixels. It's got some preset sizes, but if I go back to print, it has kind of this odd unit of measurement, which we'll talk about in a second. The other thing you can do is instead of number of artboards, it has number of pages. And this number of pages acts kind of like an artboard, but they're actual pages. And then the other thing that is a little bit different, there's this idea of facing pages. And to demonstrate that, I'm going to back out a little bit. So I've got one single page, and the default is to have facing pages selected. And now if I were to add a couple of extra pages here, if you notice they add them and it's shifted to the left. And what facing pages are for a double page spread. So if you look at a book or a magazine, and those in a book or a magazine, you'll have two pages that are facing each other. It always starts with one single page, so that would be like the front cover of the magazine or the front cover of a book. And then when you open it up, there's a spread, so that's those two facing pages. So it depends on the type of document that you're creating. So if you're creating a booklet or a magazine, you will want facing pages selected for a double page spread. If you're doing something like maybe it's a flyer that has a front and back page, you would deselect that. And if you see, what it does is it stacks them on top of each other instead of having them in a double page spread or facing pages. So that's what that difference is. And so in some of your assignment instructions, you'll be asked to add facing pages or to not have facing pages. We'll ignore primary text frame here. I'm only going to do one page for right now. And the other thing is if you notice, it's got this unit of measurement that looks a little bit different. So print documents are typically, you typically work in what's known as points and picas. Hopefully that's familiar from your reading in the typography chapter. Type is measured in units of points. So if you look here, hopefully that's familiar. There's 12 points to 1 pica. And so if you see right here, this measurement shows you how many picas, and then the P separates that and the number of points there. And so if I wanted to do something that was half a pica, it would be divided by 6. So this general unit of measurement is what people use. I'm going to show you how to swap that so it looks a little bit more familiar. But if you wanted to actually put in a document size that you're familiar with, you could type in 8 and then put the inch mark, and then if I tab over, it'll convert it to the number of points and picas. So 8 inches. And so that way you can do that without knowing exactly how many picas are in an inch. And then the other thing that InDesign deals with are columns, and it's a page structure that allows you to structure multiple columns of text. So if I wanted to, I could add columns to my document. I've got that column space or gutter space between those columns, and you can add that, and then I'm going to hit OK. So now we've got a page that feels very similar to Illustrator. And when you're dealing with text mainly, if you remember in Illustrator, you can click once and you can start to type text on a path. But in InDesign, because it's dealing with columns of text, everything has to be in a text area. So you have to click and drag to create that text area. So everything is in this column of text here. Another main difference between InDesign and Illustrator is how it deals with images when you place images. So I'm going to go to my web browser, and I don't know, I've been kind of on a look for cat pictures. I don't even have a cat, but whatever. So we're going to find a picture of a cat, and just to show you the difference, I kind of like that one. So save image as... Okay, so now you can click and drag into the document, but again, best case or best practice is to file place. So file place is Command D on the keyboard. I'm going to find my cat picture, and I'm going to place it, and it loads it similar to how it does in Illustrator. And if I click once, it'll make it actual size. I'm going to undo it. I'm going to click and drag, and I can tell it what size I want it to be. Now, the difference is right now, it's already put it inside a frame. In Illustrator, if you click and drag on the edge, it would size that image down. But in InDesign, when you click and drag on the edge of the frame, it actually adjusts the frame size. So it's almost kind of like a built-in clipping mask on the photo. And so you can adjust the cropping really easily of an image in InDesign. Now, one of the things that a lot of people do and they get kind of frustrated with are they go to grab their photo, and you kind of get into this habit of grabbing it in the center. But if you notice when I go across it, it gives me this content grabber button here. And if I click on that, it actually selects the image, and you can see the outside of the image that's inside this clipping mask or this frame. So if I click on that and I try and move it, it's actually moving the image inside the frame area. So if you want to move the whole picture, you've got to click on the outside edge of it to move the whole picture. Now let's say I know I want my picture to be in this size, but I want to see all of my cat picture. You can select it, click on the content grabber, and then go to the outside edge of this picture and hold Shift, and you can resize that image, or there are some options here where you can say fit to that frame. Again, you still have to be careful though when you start to size things that you are not stretching the image. So if I don't hold the Shift key down, it starts to stretch my image. So if I hold the Shift key, it will maintain my proportion. Now another thing is maybe you really like this but you want the whole thing bigger. If you hold Shift and Command at the same time and click and drag, so I'm holding Shift and Command, you can resize it and keep it inside its frame. So those are two kind of main things that are different in InDesign. Another thing that you'll want to deal with, instead of having an artboard, they are pages. You've got this pages palette here. So now if I was going to add another page, instead of adding an artboard, it adds a page, and it remembers that I have non-facing pages. And this is how you can maneuver back and forth between pages, is you can click on the pages in here, or you can scroll to get to the next page. And what you can do is, let's say we've got some text, so we're gonna find some information about a cat, I guess, on Wikipedia. We'll copy all this text, Command C. I'm gonna paste it into my text box here, and then I can size my text box. Now what I want to do is I want to have this text flow into this next box here. And I held Shift and Command to resize that. And you want to think about what your margins are as well as your columns, and stay true to those. So now I've got this text box. If I click on this little, they call it like an out port, which I think is kind of weird, and then I click inside that column, it'll fill that column with your text area. And then what I can do is I can go to my next page, and this is how they deal with books or magazines that have text that flows from page to page. And so what I'm going to do is go back a little bit, and if I resize this, it's going to resize my text onto my next page. See if I can get back to my regular text tool. Okay, so now if I resize this, you can see how it flows from column to column. And you always want your text to be linked in this fashion. Now, a bunch of the other tools are very similar. You've got your regular selection tool, your direct selection tool. There's some other more in-depth text editing tools which you don't need to necessarily worry about. You've got a type tool. You can create lines. You can change the color of that line, the weight of it. You've got the pen tool, so you can draw shapes similar to Illustrator. If you start drawing more intricate illustrations, it's best to do them in Illustrator, but if you have a simple shape you want to create, you can do it here. You've got a frame tool and rectangle tool. I think eventually these will be combined into one because they act very similar to each other. And so so a lot of these tools are very similar. And so I'd make sure that you just kind of experiment with it and see how things work a little bit differently. If I wanted to add a background color, just like in Illustrator, I'd create a box and fill it with that color, remove the stroke. You can change the color of it. So I added a tint or white to this color, and that's how you would add it. Another thing that becomes distracting is you have all of these lines out here to see your bounding box, and so if you wanted to hide those really quickly, you can hit the W on the keyboard, and it shows you it in preview mode without all of those lines, so you can see what it looks like. And it clips off anything that's hanging out the outside edge of the page, so you can see right here. So I think that's a pretty good short introduction to InDesign, and as we get into different assignments, we'll go into